Alex is a founding partner of Systemic Partners, and a network dedicated to exploring and defining applicable tactics and methodologies to master complexity and resolve uncertainty in business, product, and service strategy. Not eliminate uncertainty, right? He'll explain what that means. But he's also a founder of the Co-Think Tank Conference, an international forum at the intersection of business and design, and of Debug magazine, the premier German online and print magazine focusing on the cutting edge of electronic culture since 1997. So please give a big hand for Alexander Baumgardt.
So the first thing that I have to do is I have to cope with my system here and bring up the slide deck that I prepared for you tonight. So thank you for coming. Thank you for having me. I know that some of you probably had quite a long ride to come down here. I know some of my friends that came. I'm very, very happy to see them here, to see all of you here. Systemic design, designing human-centered ecosystems to drive product and service excellence. And the title might put an image in your head or even create expectations that might be a little different than what I will talk about tonight. We will see. I won't talk much about myself. But one thing that I start every presentation that I give with that slide, and actually I had like a very, very small hope that Don Norman would be here tonight, because he put it in the front of his latest book, Living with Complexity, as well. And we know each other, and I wanted to make him laugh that I like stole this from his book. But it's just wonderful. And the thing is, I will tell whatever I tell you tonight. You will see some, I would say, clever thinking. You would also see some nice information graphics, and there you will hear a lot of things that kind of make sense when I talk about it. But I really want to encourage you to not trust me with anything that I say tonight. So that's, you know, this is most important for me. It's really like what I talk about is like meant to tickle your brain, tickle your heart, tickle you as a whole being, and think about it and hopefully challenge me in the Q&A. And some of my friends that know me and know me when I talk already told me, please don't talk too long, because I can really go off on a tangent. But I will try to scan you and see if you're falling asleep. And then I will use my real-time empathic research on you to adjust to that. In conjunction or contrast to seek simplicity and distrust it, I also like this quote of Alan Cooper from About Face. Take things away until the design breaks, then put that last thing back in. It's the whole notion of iterating. And one important thing maybe to understand about me, and also like what I'm suggesting here, is that I'm an autodidact in everything that I do. And for a long time, I had been struggling with that in the early days of my career, but now it basically gives me the liberty to basically think whatever I want and mix any kind of thinking into something that makes sense and that is actually applicable to solve problems. And in that regard, this is one of my core principles, to like try things out, kind of reducing things, adding something to it. And I'm pretty transparent about it, so I'm don't trying to like fool you into something here. This is a drawing also by a mutual friend, Dave Gray. talking about complexity, my practice concerns a lot of management consulting. So I work a lot with management, VPs, executives that are in a state of, well, uncertainty. It's usually a point where, I mean, some of you know these problems. It's like diversification of the product or service portfolio, scaling into new markets, and there's a lot of things to take into account. And what business leadership, but any kind of leadership, and even down to I would say to an individual level humans cope with these days is basically that. And Dave drew this bubble of uncertainty, the chaos that surrounds us. And I found it's pretty clever. Actually, it would be probably even more accurate if it would be in constant move, that it would be animated. And actually, I started my talk with this already 5 times, and after every talk I said, like, I have to animate this, or have somebody animate it. I promise the next time I do it. So what's the problem with this? The problem is that whenever we try to tackle any kind of problem, is we can only focus on one aspect of the problem at a time, which is I could make the point anywhere here. It's has to do with our cognitive abilities. It has to do with that we can only focus on a certain reduced set of things. Therefore, we tackle this with pretty much with reductionist thinking. I have to excuse for everybody who has deep and broad knowledge of systems thinking. I have to tackle some of the core concepts for the broader audience on a pretty high level. I hope you excuse me for that, but we will arrive at some of the applications of that rather soon. So, reductionist thinking is basically looking at one element at a time to make sense of it and putting in relation to each other in sequence. So, the big problem with that is that it only focuses on snapshots of the whole, as said. It's not taking the whole thing into account because we cannot look at the whole thing. Or maybe we can. So it's kind of so either it's frustrating, or in the worst case it's creates fear, or in the even worstest case of worst, you apply this and try, and you think you make sense, but you make everything worse. We have seen this with the recent financial crisis. So this is actually a photo that I took off the library of a friend. But I think it captures pretty much the internal state, the feeling of well, he looks like a CEO on running around on his property on the weekend, thinking about the state and well-being of his company. Though he has those nice trees on his property, he can't see the forest for the trees, dealing with his with the challenges that his business has. For me, and for a lot of other people in the space, systems thinking is basically the art of seeing the forest and the trees, or at least trying to achieve that. I have found my own little way to do that, which I will explain soon. But who's familiar with Peter Senge? Probably fifth discipline, a lot of people. And Peter Senge has gained a lot of notion these days. When the fifth discipline came out, dealing with complexity was important, but it wasn't as apparent as it is today. And he coined it in that book. So systems thinking is basically seeing that everything is interconnected. There are 3 core types of systems. Again, For everybody who is familiar with it, this is kind of high level. But nonetheless, there are simple systems, cause and effect. I can even I have built this little very simple system right here, turning a light on and off. Cause and effect and control of it is rather apparent. Anybody knows what that is? It's a complicated system. It's essentially it's a machine. Well, you know what this machine does? It rolls cigarettes. So, yeah. Nonetheless, you think like, wow, well, it's just rolling a cigarette, but it's like a rather complicated machine to achieve that. So a complicated system is a system that is complicated, but still you can understand the rules. It's essentially a very, very complicated machine. These days, most of the business leaders try very hard to assume that what they deal with is a very complicated machine. Because in a very complicated machine, you can look at it, make it more efficient in terms from a friction perspective. But what we are really dealing with are complex systems. So complex system has embodies so many factors that influence each other that you can't predict it anymore. So like the most used example for this is weather. So there is up to this point there is no way we can forecast the weather because it's just too many parameters that we have to take into account. Though I would argue that probably some people out there would say that it's just a question of like how well we crunch the data and that we can achieve that. I would disagree with that. So systems thinking acknowledges that the elements of the system are in correlation. So there is circular causality. So it's the notion of cycles. There's also the notion of that basically compared to reductionist thinking that I would say like I look at A influences B, influences C, influences D, is that actually in a chain of actions or reactions or interactions that actually what starts something can be influenced later on from another element in the system. So I know it's pretty abstract. Where the hell is he getting at? Each of the elements has inputs and outputs that influences each other. There's a sense of coherency, and there's a strong sense of embeddedness, and that's what I'm really interested in. Is that basically systems of systems and systems. The stuff that I mainly deal with in my practice is looking at organizations that have problems in their product or service space. The organization has a subsystem, which is their product or service system, which is embedded in the organization system, which is embedded in a market system. It's still a fairly simple view. Looking at a company, you have the external forces. Funny enough, I find it often interesting that, like, for example, with the financial crisis, that's what a lot of the banks put the blame on, saying like it's the externalities, we can control them, so they are influencing this. So they are on here in German for a good reason, because I don't really want you to read them. Yeah, I don't want you to concentrate on it. It's like the market, industry, macroeconomics, and trends. It's everything that like kind of influences the organization from the outside. And there are the internal forces, which is basically it's the strategy, the products and service they do, service product, service model, the resource model, and the organizational model. And in no particular order, they're influencing each other. So again, you look at that and think like, okay, if I have a problem in that space, like how do I, so does he say I have to tackle everything at once, but I can only tackle one at a time? It's kind of a paradox. It is. But I argue that there are instruments that where we can trick our cognitive abilities into seeing many things at one time. Yeah, that's pretty abstract stuff. Okay. So, damn it. I actually took something away. Probably you can probably blame that onto my already like kicking jet lag that is slowly kicking in. When we're looking at systems, for me always the question is like, okay, what's at the core of this? Who is looking at those systems? It's systems looking at systems, and there is like one complex adaptive system that we deal with every day, and this is ourselves. It's the human. The human itself is a complex adaptive system, so it's not a complicated system. Part of it is a complicated system, but most of it goes further than that. And I think the quintessential interaction is actually the interaction between humans. So every other system that we are designing is only to facilitate the interaction between humans. Even if we say like, there are systems to transactional systems, so on. Again, it is to facilitate interaction between people or groups of people through intermediaries. So in the product and service space, this is often by means of technology. But essentially, there is this cycle of interaction between humans. And these are embedded in these larger systems that we create that are interconnected. I say here everything interacts, but in another presentation, I'm actually a little bit torn apart between it. I sometimes even say that everything wants to interact. There seems to be a notion that people want to interact. And everything we do drives that. Everything we do drives that in every system that we create. So this kind of quintessential interaction between humans are represented between like groups of people which represent the organization and the market, an employee and a customer, department A, department B, and maybe you could continue that. But where does this interaction really happen? It really happens where at the point of interaction itself between these two people. So, okay, what is he saying? So people that come from a human-centered design perspective know this model. So we have to understand like what users, people or customers or humans think and feel and do to basically develop better services or products. But it is always only looking at it is looking at one. It is looking at it from an individual level, but it's also looking at only at a fraction of it, because what's really happening is that people constantly interacting with each other. Yeah, I had to slide in with like department A, department B. So I know we are talking here about we have a frame or lens of computer-human interaction, but the computer-human interaction is basically the mediator of human-human interaction. So this is what typically happens when when I deal with cross-departmental stuff in organizations is that there are different mindsets collide with each other, different thinking and feeling, and it really becomes tangible when they actually interact. And I say interact is like doing something together. So feeling and thinking is nothing without the doing. So, and the doing actually brings in the holistic perspective. So systemic design means doing together to draw those connections, to actually make sense of this mess. So before I go into some cases to really exemplify that, is that these are the systemic design principles, which is basically to observe the environments, the entities and the elements of a system, and then look at their dynamics, their behavior, and their interaction. This doesn't sound too different from what we do in product or service design, but it's really looking at it from an organizational and transformational level in terms of like how the humans interact with each other. And then to depict these mechanics, patterns, find patterns, and look for the relationships to then be able to work with those, design those. And again, I call this visual systemic modeling. It quintessentially means that like there's a strong sense of that, like of visualizing these dynamics and visualizing the systems to basically show where certain patterns emerge and how dynamics and behavior become apparent and tangible. So there are three main steps, which are observation, framing, and determination, which is basically defining the space that one looks at. Again, coping with the cognitive limitations by saying like we can only look at one thing at a time. We have to look at a certain subset, use a little bit of reductionism to then actually apply a holistic viewpoint again. To then basically come to conclusions, try them out, and actually here should be a big cycle and iterate on that. There is, from my perspective, 5 main steps how you do that. And in most of the transformational efforts that I ran to around product and service design, it's only 4. The transitional aspect isn't missing, because this is often then dealt with by change management people. But I suggest that it has to be done together. So orientation, determination, translation, application, and transition. Again, the thing is like to work with the groups of people and facilitate interaction between those people to do something together. That even means like orientation means like what is the problem? To get a coherent sense across stakeholder groups, not only on an executive level or management level. The orientation phase is pretty much as we know it. It's like getting a sense through different kind of methodologies, working together. This is why I put this photo in. It's people working together. And a tool that I have found pretty interesting, I mean, it's often used in research, triangulation. But I have found it useful actually to overcome a certain cognitive limitation of not being able to focus at many things at a time. So most of the problems I deal with is they either emerge in the resource model, the organizational model, or the product and service model. So basically means client comes, somebody says, we have a problem with a certain product. I say, like, we don't have the right people to work on the strategy that has been proven to be promising based on our research. Or they say we have the right resources, we have the right product or service model, but the organizational model doesn't cope with it. What I suggest is to take the main areas, the main territories. You look at one of them, you can start wherever you want, and then you triangulate in a cyclic fashion through them in a certain time frame. So, for example, in a workshop setting, here I give an example, looks pretty messy, which gets reduced over time, is basically you give the stakeholders the ability to look, to frame the problem, and then you force them to go into the next territory, to basically change the frame, the focus, the lens. And you do this on and on and on. And what actually happens is that when you are forced to withdraw your focus from one territory, from one lens, you still have, and going on to the next lens, you have a shadow of that focus. A shadow of this focus is still in you, and it will it basically informs the way you're looking at the other territory. And you don't even have to do it in a cyclic fashion. You can even jump back and forth. But what at the end of the day, what you have is you will see very, very interesting emerging patterns. This is just a sanitized example of one of those exercises, which looks nice. Again, don't trust me. And as I'm listening to my own jet lag-induced babble, I wouldn't trust myself either. Anyway, it creates a pretty interesting overall and holistic map, yet no dynamics between the elements. But it gives a pretty coherent sense of like what a stakeholder group has to look at. This is another example how this is then translated actually into kind of a, it translates into an engagement model. But the thing is here is to underline the notion of like that visual sense making plays a vital role. Is that like working, whatever conclusions you come up with, is to visualize them, visualize the dynamics, and I found it extremely helpful to print them out extremely big, really as big like you see there, even bigger, so that people can directly engage with each other and use actually the visualization as a canvas to facilitate and intermediate their interaction. Determination is, I often talk about this with managers, and they always go like, well, this is all pretty esoteric stuff. I see the point and we have a high level view, but does this really work down to the core level? It does. Of course, there is a level where this is then backed up with all kinds of different research methodologies, where you really go down to the core level. Yet again, even on the more granular level, it has to be visualized. This is an example from a project of the automotive space. And here is an example where basically it's a business process optimization project. And this actually shows kind of the orchestration and the sequence of things, how they tie into each other, basically being broken down into a timely fashion, but seeing directly how getting like actually the executives a notion how the different process streams are related to each other and interconnected. So what you see here, you think like, okay, in regard or compared to business process modeling, that company before had imagined that each of those rows has behind of them has like extremely deep and broad granular business process models, and that the executives actually had never seen the key points or the stage gates of these processes together in some coherent fashion. So with this poster, for example, there were people that for the first time executives could draw a line between. They could have a conversation with their peers about like, but what if we shift this here a little bit here? What kind of effect would it have onto the overall outcome? Here it was essentially that in the end the goal was to obviously being able to produce more in a more timely fashion with lower cost. Translation. It's from the same project. And I actually asked myself, I could give this project, use this project as an entire case to make a point, but I don't really want to do it because I don't want to put the emphasis on it too much. But in this project, we reached a very, very interesting point. When you deal with this kind of complexity in process modeling, you come to a certain point, especially when you're in a technology-driven environment, where you say like, well, why don't we track all those? Why don't we interconnect all these models so that we then could, like, as I explained before, design them, apply scenarios, do forecasting, and also track the overall performance of those models through some kind of technological solutions. And that was actually an early driver where parts of the company said like, oh, we want to do this. We want to actually develop a system to actually drive the process. And looking at the constraints of the overall constraints of time, and again, the abilities of the human stakeholders, like a dozen of departments and department leaders that had to deal with this, we said, no. Let's do something else. Let's look at how do they cope with like staying on top of their processes and innovating on their processes at this point. And we found out that they're all using different kind of programs, platforms, whatsoever. And the goal was also to do this on an international scale with different markets. So we thought like, okay, what could be the easiest way that we can induce a feedback cycle that like when they find points to innovate, how do we get it back into our system? At the end of the day, we basically developed a paper plan, which is a mix of a to-do list and a Gantt chart. But the way it works, and that is in regard to the how applicable this is. Because the thing is, if you design a process and the process renews itself, and we can't embody it in the underlying system, then why do this all in the first place? So what we did is actually we developed a plan model that could be printed out. It could be basically easily distributed. But we developed it in a way so that there is no, we don't have there with no page numbers or whatsoever that would like, the section, the flow of the core parts of the process were designed pretty open. So, and at the end of the day, you would have a folder where each step, quintessential step of the process would be documented with all the core stakeholders that played a vital role in a certain step. So, no, it's in here. So what we did is we put a very, very simple feedback mechanism in it. I don't know, maybe some of you are familiar with the Toyota process of the, that the production lines, that like every work on a production line is allowed to basically innovate on the production line, that they would be able to attach something to the production line or break something off, and then there are reviews, and that the innovation from the production line workers would be taken into account, and they would redesign the production lines. So we did a similar thing here, but on a much lower level. We said it's like every page in this folder has basically a fax number on it, and as a central fax number that you can send this page to from all over the world. And there's actually a department that will take these fax sheets and will actually add the changes to the system, which then will gets redistributed. So the thing is, you would say like, I could do this. Why don't this could be done with a web service or of some sort. But the thing is, at this point, taking the constraints of the next higher system into account, which in that case was the IT infrastructure, which didn't allow these kinds of things, and also taking into account how the people are working and making it the least effort for them to basically put their changes in paper and sending them into creating that kind of easy cycle, feedback cycle. It made a lot of sense. And compared to other projects, we had the effect that at the end of the day, it was really used, and it's actually still in use, and still continuing to grow, and it's always up to date, only by a very, very simple mechanic. At the end, actually, the company even founded a new department for, in this case, integrated communication measures, because all these processes are strongly touched to the communication of new product and development of new product. And the transition phase is bringing it to the people, working with the people to make it live. So I'm already witnessing that I'm talking a lot, but there's one important aspect, or not one important aspect. There's a certain mindset. This comes back to the overall notion of like, if you're looking at this, how do you achieve that? What kind of requirements do we have for people that are able to design in such a fashion? And I think it's 3 points. It's three areas. It's emotional agility, intellectual agility, and tactical agility, because, as I said before, it's feeling and thinking coming together and doing. Neither one of them is very helpful, but they all together make a lot of sense. I run through them very quickly because a lot of them sound probably very familiar to you. So the emotional agility is essentially openness. Foundational thinking doesn't help a lot in this. And usually what we do is that we try to address the different stakeholder groups in for example, the departments. Good example from the technology space often is like you have product management, you have developers, you have designers with very different cultural DNA. We find the ones that are open enough and not as foundational that it would endanger their whole being if they open up, reaching out across their cultural DNA and their mindset. And that also has a lot to do with like the ability of empathy to basically understand how does somebody else think. And a lot of this is apparent for somebody who comes from a people-centric or human-centered perspective in design, but we not very often apply this actually to our coworkers and teams or to our managers, to our peers. Driving intrinsic motivation, so it has to come from within. So there is no way to actually force people to think out of their normal box if they, a little bit of extrinsic motivation, money, fear, those are often the methods of choice, won't bring you very far. Mindfulness sounds a little bit esoteric, but it's extremely important as a level of grounding, adjustment, and in general optimism. The intellectual agility is being able to think in systems, trusting intuition. And I would say it's with these kinds of problems you always have to, I guess some people call it educated guessing, but I would say intuition is the key to it, is to be able and bold enough or brave enough to use the intuition and to have peers in the team that are open enough, respectful enough, mindful enough to do the same. Emotional intelligence, which is basically the intellectual counterpart to empathy on an emotional level. Being able to visualize, which doesn't mean that you have to be able to draw, but at least being able to draw out connections. Synthesis, the ability to fuse different ways of thinking into something new. And abductive reasoning, it's an interesting term in English, but it's basically thinking, what if? And I always come with abductive reasoning. If the planners for the atomic power plants in Japan would have used that, they wouldn't have built the power plant as they did, putting it next to the ocean and in close proximity to all those towns. So, tactical agility, very important. Extremely apparent for current thinking and practice around design. Multidisciplinary collaboration. And here it's really about the doing. It's not the notion of like, we want to collaborate, we really collaborate. This is doing. Understanding and need finding is really understanding us, understanding our peers, to be able to understand also third parties from an organizational perspective, our market and customers better. Iterative prototyping, experimentation on every level, like from up to the strategy level. And systems mapping, to map out the systems. There are also like there's technology that helps with that, but I would say the first point is also to engage in collaborative systems mapping, storytelling and gamification to give a coherent sense of the embodied underlying story and core of it. Storytelling and gamification could actually be 2 points. We'll look at this now. And gamification is basically to make it actually easier for stakeholders to engage by using game mechanics as motivational measures. And co-creation. This is not only the twin of multidisciplinary collaboration, but it's also the notion of that, like, something that is co-created together has co-authorship. So why is it important to, for example, to defy not invented here syndrome, which is I guess we all know this, how many problems that creates. And so this is boiled down. This is like what I call a systemic design mindset. It's like you gotta love those kinds of things, or learn to love those kinds of things, to cope with the constant change that is happening, and to see opportunity there, and to actually learn to love the chaos and the uncertainty, actually. So it's like looking for patterns and interdependencies, is to assume complex, nonlinear relationships. So like whenever you think, oh my, that's pretty simple, yes, it's probably less simple than you think. Focus on description rather than explanation. So like really try to see like what is. Aim to extend peripheral vision beyond traditional boundaries. Like it's really it's a key point. Value curiosity, insight, and intuition, and develop a lively interest in the what preceding the why. And this is for me the most important one, which is like work creatively with paradox, uncertainty, and contradiction. So I think up to this point I have completely confused you, and I will end actually with a rather esoteric notion, which always freaks tech people out. It's actually feeling and thinking. They are all fair things that nobody ever takes notice of because they don't become tangible without doing. I can only stress this again and again and again. I can sit. I actually sometimes I like to bring this down to a very core level. I can sit on the table with my wife all day long and have feelings and think a lot, and she too. But I guess we have to interact to that the other gets the notion of it as well. Everything else is interpretation. It's better to do co-creative, co-interpretation, I would say, by doing. And this is basically where I say that's being. So that's my little German practical Zen Buddhism side note, you know. But I don't know if it's actually for me. This is the most important slide. This is to get across that it is, and getting back to Peter Senge, who read the fifth discipline, knows that like his notion was that the first thing that becomes before you become a practitioner of system thinking, apply it, is that you have to master yourself. It's like self-mastery. So like, how can I, if I don't know myself, how can I deal with other people? And for me, coming from a design realm and from a product and service perspective, it's always astonishing that we know so much and we are so smart about researching the hell out of our customers, talking to them, being empathic. But if it comes to our direct peers, we don't have the time. And that's why I say, crunch this, challenge me on this. I am not an academic. That's why I can make all these claims, which makes me very happy. And I can only base it on on the experience that I have through the project work. And so my call to you is: feel, think, all fair enough, but do things together. Do crunch on this, converse, and try it out. Build it, and be. And that's it. Oh, okay. It's like you're running up to me like
Yes, lovely, thank you.
with questions. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Even without a mic, I would hear you.
Of course you would. But I don't really want to speak loudly. There we are. Good. Okay, Alex. Could you go back to the system map 2 slides back?
Oh.
That one.
Yeah.
I really like the disappear the slide. Go to slide 4. So what I really like is that when you're doing focus on description rather than explanation.
Yeah.
What's going on here seems to me is don't jump to solution, and so that seems the central thing to that. Another thing which I had, which you partially answered, which it's rather far back, but it's the slide that has the beginning and the end in the middle. Could we go back to that one?
Look at this.
Yes.
Which one?
Go back further. The one that has in the beginning where you reduce things. Good gracious.
Lovely, huh? Like
Yeah.
all these graphs.
I think
I love it.
I think you're a little bit jet lag stoned. The one where you open the process, in the middle where you start identifying things, and then you close the process. Okay.
See, this I had on PowerPoint. Why can't I jump to a section?
Aha, there we go. You just passed it. There we go. Stop.
Yeah.
Stop. Okay. I've seen this graphic many times, and one of the things I was, so I know you and Dave Gray and how you work somewhat.
Yeah.
I think there's some differences. And also I know Julian Loren that also does things for large systems. And one thing I noticed is that is the team picking. So you were talking, so you go internally and find the people who have the open-mindedness and the empathy. So you vet them.
Mm-hmm.
So that's great. But another thing a friend of Julian does is he gates it so that the specialists, the non-open-mindedness, not people, get a chance to come in and fire away, and then they're out of the room, and then people can do another. So there's a whole bunch of these visual system models going on.
Yes.
With breaks for, okay, let's bring in the expert that will not change glasses or perspective, because they are useful. I mean, you don't want to entirely isolate them.
Yes.
Do you do that?
Yes. Depends completely on the problem. I say there are certain things where there are external experts are brought in that have more in-depth domain knowledge, or even like down to a technical operational level, where you say like, look, and this is why, I mean, for example, yes, you have like a certain business analytics department, and all these people want to work, but for this particular type, we have identified you need a certain domain level expertise. Bring them in just to like clarify this point. You don't have to like extend your department. But at the same time, this can be very dangerous, because also what I said before, if you identify the tribe of these people that can work across discipline, so it's very crucial to establish something like, I would say, like a humus. I love humus. To make that sustainable, because you could also endanger these people by calling them out. There's this tribe, and so if there's a broad group of like very strong foundational thinking, they will identify that as cancer in the system. In an early stage.
Oh yeah.
Because
absolutely.
there are six systems
yeah.
that like would spit out something. From their perspective, it's cancer. From a higher level, you would say like, no.
I get it, because they close everybody down, close everybody down.
Exactly.
And so what Julian is prepare the people, say, okay, we're going to bring the person in, 1-2 days, and then they get to go. Because you can't keep them in the room.
That is the, where is it? That's the important thing here. And I should say, this bar here, this can either be the little guy up there. This can be the consultant, like could be me or somebody who applies that. But the thing is actually to go through a cycle together with the stakeholders. And part of the stakeholder group, 1, 2, 3, one could be that could be the management level. It could even be the board, And then the thing is that they have to take. They have to feel responsible and they have to be responsible. That means they have to do. It doesn't mean that like bring somebody inside, identify tribes, and then you outsource the responsibility for these kinds of things. It's very important because after one cycle, my goal is always to say like, to make myself dispensable. I don't want to be a super consultant, dependency. It's about, you guys, we do it together, we create this together, and then you do it on your own.
I completely agree with you.
Okay. I missed that point.
And in that light, I was thinking about your Audi project.
Yeah.
So that feedback mechanism, at some point, it seems to me that you're going to have to do another systemic overview.
Yes.
At some point. I mean, that's going to run so long.
Yeah.
And then factors in the environment, the ecosystem will change. Does Audi, do your clients recognize that? Do you tell them that up front? That, okay, this will work for so long, but,
I mean, they recognize it, and but it doesn't necessarily mean that they always do it. They like if it works for a while, they usually run with it, and then it's actually, to be honest, it's up to me, like in other contexts as well, to review this and inspire them to like look at it again. And I would also claim here to say like that with the first challenge, another challenge starts. For example, say like, look, we have it running now with the simple measure of like feedback loops coming in through a fax machine on paper. But now that we are learning about how it's actually used and applied and how it's like innovating itself, and we learn from it, we can put up another project where we then can focus on like how can we build a technological solution to facilitate it, and then actually start like learning from it, forecasting, monitoring, and so on.
That scares me a little bit because system thinking is not deterministic, reductionist thinking.
The thing, yes, but yes, and? No?
Oh, this is paradox. Let's go.
So this is paradox because the longer you think about, you work with it, you obviously find out that it's always a combination of simple, complicated, and complex systems that kind of interact with each other. Mm-hmm. So there's a moment in time, where it is okay to have to assume a complicated or even a simple system if it plays the right part in the grander system. And that is actually working with the last slide, with the contradiction and with the paradox. The thing is that you have to be able to rethink and review it at any time. It's not like, oh, we have this in place now, and this will work forever. I mean, this is always what we all love, right? This is our fantasy. It's a human fantasy, and it's the fantasy of that we won't die. I mean, there is a philosophical side to that, obviously. It's like, it's the fear of dying.
Existential.
Yeah, it's an existential thing.
Right.
It's wishful thinking. Yeah.
Okay, up.
Hi, thanks for the talk. I was wondering if you could talk about your design principles. You had one slide that was, I think, adjacent to the one that we were looking at before.
Oh no, the design principles are here. No design This one?
Yeah.
Yes.
I was wondering if you could explain a little bit about how you would apply this.
How I would apply this? This is basically mainly used in the mapping exercise of the system. So look to basically find out what are the core components of the system, which would be the environments, which are basically grouped entities, and the elements that are that make the entities. And then that would be basically, it's a snapshot, it's the components, not in motion, not in a dynamic fashion. And then you look at, and that's like why it's basically using the same visual language is like, how do these elements interact with each other? You could also, I mean, this has to be reduced here. You could also look, is like, does the entity interact with each other, and the environments? But at the end of the day, the core focus is obviously on the elements, because they are the in some respect the object level, you know, of like they are the tangible aspects of the system. Everything else is clustering and grouping. Behaviors is actually a certain types of interaction inside an entity that could be identified as a certain pattern. Yeah? It's basically going right down here, and then the dynamics between the elements inside the system. Because at the end what we want to understand is like how does the system behave, and especially in the areas that we are thinking that they are where our core problems lie. Are these really the core problems, or is this by what is it really driven? This is what we want to look at. Does this answer? I could go on forever. Or any further? Yeah. Yeah, okay. And there is also like, I mean, there would be ways, another thing to do is to do a workshop on this, which is a lot of fun. Any more questions, please? No? Yeah? I answer any question of Bo afterwards.
Just more context, could you
Yeah.
talk a little bit about how you go about mapping the system? I think that, you know, there's a lot of different ways to do that, but it seems like as people engage, you don't always see the system you're in. It's through that engagement that you start to understand how it's operating. So how do you, what's your approach to mapping the system?
So my approach is there are very different approaches to that. And even people, you could act it out, you know. I mean, there is there's a whole overlap to the whole like systemic systems therapy and stuff like that, where people actually take become actors of the system. They take as a role and acting it out. But I actually I don't do that, and I also don't have I think not the formal authority to do that. What we do is, or what I often do is like to actually use what I explained here, and then come to a level where it gets more coherent, and we see certain areas and clusters emerge, and then we reach a level where we actually show the dynamics between them by basically like flow diagrams, you know, like what influences what, and that's the way. It's pretty traditional actually, and I hope to do this more interactive in the future. My biggest goal is, or one of my goals to continue my babble on this is like after seeing how useful, especially with executives, is these kinds of things. And you could even imagine it with a systems map, is using interactive technology to be able to have them directly interact with the information and to do basically high-level scenario thinking. I mean, in architecture, some of the stuff is already done to like see like ecological footprints and so on. But on a level where it basically informs strategic decisions, I haven't seen it yet. And there's a lot of discussion around this in don't find a word right now. For example, the Harvard Business Review, I think 2 or 3 months ago, they had a huge their core topic was dealing with complexity and talking actually about that, like forecasting technologies and put a strong notion on visual modeling of systems interactively. But I hope this answers your question to this
Thank
point.
you.
Sure. More questions, please.
Just a little one. You had gamification there, and it's such a big thing this past year or so. How do you use it in your practice?
So there is, good question. So it is essentially, it's like, I mean, gamification has become kind of a buzzword, you know, in some respect. It's like if I make something playful, it's gamified, right? But here it's more about, it's about engagement models. It's like using the core mechanics, core game mechanics that driving motivation, you know, and like giving people a certain objective, rewarding it in a certain way. This can prove very helpful to help people onto the way of getting intrinsically motivated. I know, and now both should jump up and like go on jump on me and say like, but this is so there is a paradox as well, because it is manipulation in a way. So it's like if you use game mechanics, it is intrinsically is an extrinsic motivation, because you're using a basic patterns of physiology and psychology to drive actions. Now you could argue like if you're a dictator, your intent is to drive it, you could use game mechanics as well. I say it is helpful to lead people on the right way. If a German says that in front of it's kind of awkward. Anyway, hey, but I hope you get the point. So it's like, I mean, we know these things, especially as designers. We know exactly how to manipulate people, you know. But here it is helping them to reach a point of openness to be able to tackle the solutions together themselves. That's the way I would phrase it. And it's entirely about the intention of the people, of the person who leads them into that. And that's why it's so important that that in this respect, the consultant or facilitator, plays such an important role from as a whole being itself. Okay? More, please, more. I love the questions. I had never so good questions, but maybe it's also my jet-lagged brain.
How do you deal with profits versus the environment with companies you work with?
Profits versus the environment. Can you please specify the question a little?
What's normally most cost effective is normally the most hurtful to the environment.
Yeah.
So how do you ever bring this out?
Oh, of course.
And tell the companies what you're doing?
Yeah.
And how do you convince them to be more environmental friendly?
I don't think that I can convince them. Maybe sometimes but sometimes they even see it and they don't want to be convinced, right? The thing is, The point is here's an example. There are two types. There are certain types of companies that works well with. It's basically sometimes also it's like it's the best to speak to the person in a company that is concerned with the well-being of the company. So well-being of the company is nothing that is short-term profit-driven in most cases. So for example, family-run businesses are more open to this, to see this in the long term, to say like, oh yeah, we reduce profits now, still without endangering going out of market, to like have sustainable growth. It's like a similar argument as you would have in the in other areas like more meaningful investment strategies with lower profit but long-term sustainable growth rates or return rates. And here's the thing: even with that client, management-run businesses, very hard to do. Only if you can make a very clear, cost-driven case that also serves in the short term. So because the managers don't care, because they will move on to the next thing anyway. So that's my only experience I have with that. But I fortunately didn't run into any case where I would have to make an ethical choice, because for me personally, it's like there are certain types of companies that I wouldn't work for anyway. So, and for example, I don't have a problem with the automotive industry. There are certain for example, like this tobacco industry, I wouldn't work for. But like the automotive industry is something they. I'm in principle an optimist, and I think there's a lot of opportunity to turn them to the better, and I think they can and they will. So, does this answer the question to some extent? Okay.
Great talk, Alex, and you're holding up just fine.
Yeah, I have sweat on my forehead, and I crave human flesh, and I have the rage virus, and
This man needs a beer.
yeah, maybe.
I'm intrigued by how you use large sheets of paper. Your whole analog process, folded sheets of paper in a binder being sent around the world on a fax machine. I think this is ridiculous.
I know.
And
Isn't
I-
that fantastic?
I know, it's wonderful. I'd like to learn more about the facility that you like to operate in to display these large sheets of paper and give that long perspective and near perspective on the detail at the same time.
You have to
It's
come
just-
visit my office. I can show you large rolls of.
Love to see it.
Yeah.
But my question then is really, how do you create a transition into the interactive environment? How are you planning to get out
That's
of
a big
paper
challenge.
spaces?
So I encourage everybody to talk. Let's talk about that and do that, because there's a huge opportunity, I think, there is in that space. I mean, we all have friends that are doing some amazing stuff in like scenario forecasting and so on. But to bring it down to a level where like an average executive with a short attention span, likes to interact with a large scale, I want to multi-touch my complex processes to make sense. If we have to get to that. And now thinking about it, this would probably, that alone would probably justify a think tank or a group effort to do this.
Do you know Alex Pang, a local thinker?
No.
P-A-N-G, Alex Pang.
No.
Look him up. He's got a wonderful series of papers on what he calls paper spaces.
Oh, okay.
And he goes into this quite deeply about the whole human interaction with paper in paper spaces. He did a lot of work with the Institute for the Future.
Okay.
With Paul Sappho and those guys.
Can you send it to me? Okay. Please, more questions if you don't want really fall asleep. I want a question of each.
You kind of had, you had your like internal company and then the external stuff.
Yeah.
And, you know, now that we're getting more global, more connected, you know, it's really this cross-entity, you know, inter-entity.
Yeah.
So it's getting more complicated. How are you looking at that or drawing that? Or
I would argue it's not inter-entity. That is only on a theoretical level. You say like, oh yeah, they all sit in like different places, but like in our model, in our architecture, they are part of the same entity. But in reality, they are not. You know, and so because the thing of like there's actually some wonderful work or now insights from this whole future of work program at Microsoft. You know that they have very aggressively in a positive way kind of completely remodeled like I think in Austria now, in Switzerland they're the way of working, like everybody can work from home remotely or wherever they are. So everything is teleconferencing, and they have found out amazing things, which actually show that if you would really look at it, you have this assumption of there's the entity of our resources, but then you have those clusters of like physical clusters, these remote clusters. They're totally different dynamics, yeah, and then they interact with their peer system, the family at home. So they have created complete new patterns of like doors open, doors not open, that approachable, that not approachable, while teleconferencing system on or not so approachable to peer, blah, blah, blah. So you get a point. So the thing is, again, it's even more important to look at it from a systems perspective because it doesn't get easier, simpler, it becomes more complex from a pure human interaction perspective. Okay. No questions from this side? Gentlemen?
Enjoy the talk.
Really? Oh, that's good.
I've got a question, Alex. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the difference in system thinking between American culture and German culture.
Oh, God. Yeah. Yeah. Well. It's a good. That's a very good. It's a good question. That.
Do you see similarities and differences? Do you see system thinking more in one culture or another culture?
I see. But again, it's a good example. So, my educated guess, my gut feeling says, oh, Americans are more open, like easier to, you know. But this is entirely informed by my peer system, which is probably like a fraction of representing corporate America, I would say. It's probably, another part of my brain says it's probably harder in the US because the way the corporate structures, the architectures with all these different levels, kind of like create a lot of barriers through those levels. And the Germans, from the outside, you would say like, oh yeah, but they are like, and if they have their little boxed in thing, it's funny. I mean, I used to work in the US for a while, and felt never more German than during that time, in a good way actually. So there are two things. The Germans, in the beginning of projects, they like to think a long time, a lot, where you go like up to like, oh my God, like if you think any longer, 10 competitors from the US, and they obviously do, will go to market with some shite, but they are there. So the Americans, they start, and then they run into all these problems, and that's probably why all this agile is coming from. It has been made, like it's come from a Japanese, but made it popular in the US because, hey, that's what we do anyway. So and now we have a way of justifying it. So, and for me, is what I am doing actually is again, sorry that I have to reference myself, but in some way it's the only thing I can reference anyway because I am me, is that I'm a hybrid of both. So I have, what I'm trying to do there is a mixture of both, you know? A fair amount of thinking, feeling, acting together, trying out, revisiting, but to do this on a meta level where that is normally not done. So does that answer the question?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Okay, good. Look, now they get inspired. Like, it's gamification. You will get a badge.
Alex, how do you sell it?
How do I sell it? That's a typical Teddy question. That's a typical Teddy question. There is no, so it's another thing. Here's my answer to this question is, to do this, it's nothing that you can put a sales force on, you know, and sell it with a clear sales pitch. Because it has a lot to do with, with trust. So in terms of like, you have to find a business leader, for if it's a business leader, that trusts you enough to try this. The thing is, like, when I had clients or prospects, maybe almost clients, said like, look, this is experimental in many ways. So it is, we have to be clear about that we are going onto a path, and that there can't be any guarantees, because there can no guarantees anyway. And with some it works, with others not. And then the only thing is that the case that I would make is like, you have to build up cases that can prove that it works. But even that, if I say like, look, Procter and Gamble, or look, even better, look, US car manufacturer, forget about all your stuff. We will now make fact sheets, like, which will help you to like innovate on your processes. You know, that wouldn't work either. So it's really individual, and there is no way to easily serialize that and scale it. So it's basically, it's in some way, the only way to scale this is, from a business perspective, is to have a breed of people that can practice it, you know, and do it in a joint fashion. Then it's basically like a particular approach of a business consultancy.
Yeah, I found that it's often the demonstration with executives right there in the same time that either wins or loses the game.
Yeah, but even then, it completely depends of the time in the year, of the day, in the week,
Well,
of the temperature
question.
in the room.
The next question I would have is,
Often.
I'm very picky about who I work with, because some people are just
Yeah.
giving me nightmares.
Yeah.
So do you manage your process that way? Do you go through the get to know you stage to the point where you figure
Yes.
out whether it's
So the
be
thing is, it takes very long time. It has from initial contact with people to like opening up to start a process takes a minimum of a year. Minimum.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
It's not like hey, have we heard about this and like let's start next week. It's more like I have like some relationships are more like I don't know when, I don't know how, but like let's keep a conversation going, and then it's more like telephone calls. They give me little things, little snippets, and like see like what does he think about it, or do you know? Like I often also work with my network. Say like I know somebody, you should talk to him, and then or maybe we do something together. And it's a lot about trust. There is no way to take, and that is the thing of it. You see at the being. It is, you can't take this human aspect out of it, like of, at the end, it's a leader It's a leader who has to work with humans. It's a leader who has to work with an advisor or consultant. The dream of like 15 years ago or 12 years ago, I visited Silicon Valley. I visited SAP's innovation lab. They were very proud and said, like, Alex, look at this. I said, what is this? This is the boardroom. A boardroom which had 4 walls, completely screens, you know? And look, it's like we have already sold 3 of those. And then we have a 4th one, which is our showcase room. So like big map of the world with like little red, yellow, green lights over their markets. And look, I can go down to the level of the desk of a person, you know, who did what in their SAP system. I could actually fire him if I want to. So, you know, it's like completely removing yourself from the human scale of things. And it's a big mistake.
That doesn't surprise me about SAP.
No, but
they capture and torture customers.
The case that I wanted to make, why is this so important to build, have this trusted relationship is, it only works with people that understand that they have to take the responsibility, you know? It's
well
like,
said. That's a great thing.
It's the main thing. I think here's my optimist thing. That's also why I always love to come to San Francisco, is that I am very optimistic that there is on any levels in society, we have new kind of entrepreneurs, we have new kinds of investors, we have new kinds of managers for those businesses these people invest in, and they either start up, and a new kind of workforce of people who do the jobs. And that makes me very happy. And the thing is, there are now policymakers. So another thing is serendipity, what I encourage you, buy magazines from completely different domain sectors. When you now like read political affairs in Europe, you see like, they start to talk about visual sense making, you know, because there are new, younger policymakers. They understand that like the way they try to tackle off on a tangent, I do, but it was a good one. More question, please, from the host.
No, I don't have a question. I was just going to suggest we wrap it up.
Okay.
My question is, have we had enough? One more, okay. Last 6.
So many good questions. Lovely.
One is a comment. I'm imagining that Germans think a lot before they do something.
Yeah.
Because I imagine that mistakes aren't really tolerated. I don't know if that's true, but that's what I imagine.
There's it's a big aspect, you know. It's just like you fail once, you're probably a failure for life, and here it's different in terms of like the entrepreneur philosophy. The more you fail, probably the better you are. Yes.
Here it's
in some respect.
A learning opportunity. The other question, the question is, where do you go for inspiration? What kind of like people, things, places? What inspires your system?
To you. Well, that's amazing. It's human interaction. I mentioned before, I'm an autodidact, and like for a long time I said like, I ran into people through my career and said like, but I haven't studied this, I haven't studied that, and then they told me, but you have read the same things than we did, but you didn't lose any time. I said, yeah, but I would have loved the time for a graduate project where I just eat pizza and have nothing to worry about. But at the end of the day, it's like, but how did I get to the sources? Because people that I trusted, mentors, or that I thought like, it would be cool if that would be a mentor, but I trust that person enough, if that person suggests a certain thing to read or thinks that's quality, I should check it out. That was my guiding principle. And it comes back as a big cycle into like who to work with, who to invest in. Also, I invest in people by conversing, trying to find common ground, and I think this will get stronger in the coming generations, because that's again humans are the navigation device in the growing complexity. So even if we have all these like data analytics, This is all great, monitoring, you have all this data, but only we can make sense of it. So only we can make sense of it. Otherwise, we are in a 70s dystopia movie. And I argue we are not. So, because I'm an optimist. What can I say? So, thank you. Yeah, well.